On those notes, let's bring in our leadoff panel for a Thursday night. White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal, Eli Stokols, is back with us. The host of MSNBC Live at 2 p.m. every day, Katy Tur, who covered the entirety of the Trump campaign. She's back with us. Also returning to the broadcast, MSNBC contributor and politics editor at The Root, Jason Johnson. So, Eli, we'll begin with you. What does it mean when these two Republican senators, Tennessee, South Carolina, said what they said today?
Well, I don't know if a dam is fully breaking here, but it is definitely a ratcheting up of the rhetoric coming at this White House from Republicans. And I've been talking to some Republican senators and their staffs on Capitol Hill this week, trying to figure out what the conversations are. And a lot of them have said this does feel different. Now, when Senator Corker said that recently his comments don't reflect that he understands the character of the nation, I mean, you know, if you're being honest, Donald Trump's character was on display throughout the campaign. But there is a change in his comments post-Charlottesville that has brought some of his beliefs into starker relief for some of these senators and lawmakers on the Republican side. And you do get the sense that there is a greater awareness, even if the president is sort of indifferent to history, they are not. And they know this is one of those moments where history will remember where they stood. And so they are coming out with much stronger language. Senator Corker has tried throughout the first 6-7 months of this presidency to try to coach Donald Trump, to try to bring him along, hoping that maybe he would learn the ways of Washington. And so there may be some of that also in the scolding that he delivered today. But really, I think a lot of these senators are stepping back from this and understanding that this is a fundamental moment to basically pick a side and say whether or not they ascribe to the aspirational values this country was founded on or not. And I think you can see which side most of the Republican senators stand on.
Katy Tur, to paraphrase the lyrics from just about any blues song, he's been down before. We saw, you name the number of instances. We saw Excess Hollywood. We saw I Like My Heroes Not to Get Captured. We saw the Gold Star family. He's been down before.
The Excess Hollywood tape, fighting with the Pope. It goes on and on.
Oh, yes,
saying
there is
that,
fighting with the Pope. I forgot that.
Saying, you know, that 2 Corinthians was 2 Corinthians. The list goes on and on. I went back and the first time he talked about General Pershing, which he tweeted today in response to Barcelona, study what General Pershing of the United States did to terrorists when caught. There was no more radical Islamic terror for 35 years. So the first time he said that was in North Charleston, South Carolina, the day before the South Carolina primary, which he went on to win. He talked about this story, this internet hoax. We're going to talk about it later.
No, we might have.
We might have it.
Video. We do. Let's hear him.
Sure.
February of 2016.
February 19.
You were there. Let's listen to Donald Trump. We'll talk about it.
Early in the century, last century, General Pershing, did you ever hear rough guy? Rough guy. And they had a terrorism problem. And there's a whole thing with swine and animals and pigs, and you know the story, okay? They don't like that. And they were having a tremendous problem with terrorism. And by the way, this is something you can read in the history books. Not a lot of history books because I don't like teaching this. He took 50 bullets and he dipped them in pig's blood. And he had his men load his rifles and he lined up the 50 people and they shot 49 of those people. And the 50th person, he said, you go back to your people and you tell them what happened. And for 25 years, there wasn't a problem, okay?
Let's take a look at what Maggie Haberman of the New York Times tweeted in response to that this afternoon. The commander-in-chief is telling people to study a military incident that historians have called a myth. To be clear, this myth was spread via email forward chains, now being told by the president. And for those wondering about the, quote, swine, they don't like that. It's believed he's talking about the dietary laws of Islam forbidding pork. Katy Tur, you were saying about the story.
Yeah, so let's not... He said 35 years in the tweet today. He said 25 years in that notwithstanding. This is an internet hoax, a myth that was passed along via email chain that he was touting in South Carolina among military families, in the same speech where he was saying waterboarding doesn't go far enough. Around the time he was calling Ted Cruz, a word he used to say that he grabbed women by because he didn't advocate waterboarding. Around the time that he was fighting with the Pope, yet he still went on to win South Carolina by a wide margin. And it made me wonder at the time, and I tweeted this whole note that I had from that moment, I said these wins are certainly giving him a free pass to take his rhetoric and behavior even further, if that's possible. Remember, this is February of 2016. A lot more happened after that. And why did he feel like he had a free pass? Because many of his voters decided they wanted to vote for him long before that. And they were not going to be swayed by anything that he said on the stage, anything that they saw on the news. And much of what you're seeing him, how he's operating now, is this belief that my voters aren't going anywhere, no matter what I do. They've already decided that they like me, and I can say whatever I want. I can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, and no one's going to have a problem with it. The question is, and we don't know this because there's not an election coming up, whether or not that's true. The polls at the time did all show him down. The polls right now show him with dismal ratings. But is that going to change? Or is it, in Steve Bannon's words to the American Prospect, a good thing for liberals or Democrats to come out and start talking about race and identity politics? And does that allow them just to hit on this economic message? It sounds absolutely ludicrous. But at the same time, we saw it work for him.
So, Jason, we have sat around this table and talked about two major stories for the last 2 weeks. And looking at them, I have the following takeaways. Kim Jong-un craves validation. And the haters, the neo-Nazis, KKK, the white supremacists, crave validation. They've both received it. Things are escalated now. What do you make of this president's ability to de-escalate?
I don't think he has that ability. I don't think he's interested in it. I think that President Trump thinks that fighting somehow makes him tougher. Avoiding conflicts is not what he does. We might be able to rest somewhat easily tonight thinking that Steve Bannon and members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff aren't going to get us into a nuclear conflict with North Korea. But the president has given aid and comfort to terrorists, to domestic terrorists, to white nationalists. He's basically told them that they're on equal ground with protesters. He's basically said, do whatever it is that you want to do. And that is going to create an escalation, the likes of which no one in this country really remembers. If we thought that 20-something years ago that Oklahoma City was bad, when Timothy McVeigh referred to children as stormtroopers didn't care, what are white nationalists going to do now? And I want to go back to those two senators in particular. You've got Tim Scott in South Carolina. We know what terrorism looks like in South Carolina. I lost a friend in AME, Emmanuel Church, when Dylan Roof went in and shot people. And that is the future we're going to have in this country if we don't have a president who has the moral clarity to say that white nationalism and terrorism plays no part in this country's future.
Is it me or the question I posed at the start of the broadcast? This seems to have unleashed talk and unleashed thoughts that at worst were suppressed, but at best were kind of moot. Most good-thinking people thought we were beyond that.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's always been this element in this country. And this is what's important. And I've been saying this all along. You think about ISIS, right? ISIS has killed more Muslims than white Christians. When you have domestic terrorists, they are trying to go after these white nationalists. They want to kill white people first. Yeah. They want to kill all the white people in America who actually are standing in the way of them getting this white ethno state. So that is what we're looking at now. We're looking at people who are going to attack the majority population of this country. And until we recognize that only by working together, not just black and brown and tan people, but everybody realizing that this is a dangerous national security issue, none of us can be safe. And the president, and I think a lot of his administration, don't see that.
Eli, maybe it's because we've seen the button he pushes for a refreshed Diet Coke, but our assumption about this president and all presidents, that old phrase, don't you have people for that there's some structure, especially now under a just-retired Marine four-star general who has enforced more structure around things like staff meetings and Oval Office flow. So when the president tweets out this worthless email chain, a myth, a hoax, I think it's fair to ask the question, is there some structure around this guy?
Well, there may be a better structure, a tighter structure around him now with John Kelly as chief of staff than there was with Reince Priebus. all the reporting I've done tells me that, there is more of a closed-door policy to the Oval Office. Aides can't just mill about and get in there and slip things onto the president's desk. But as we've seen this week, John Kelly, unless he's attached to the president at all times, cannot control everything that he's tweeted, the controversial things that he's already picked up off the internet that are lodged in his brain, like the thing about General Pershing that he tweeted again sort of reflexively this afternoon, just shortly after news of this terror attack was breaking. And so, yes, it's very difficult for him to control a 71-year-old guy who has his sort of thoughts and habits deeply ingrained in him. That is really the challenge for John Kelly. Yeah, Steve Bannon may be a problem. Yeah, there may be people in the White House that he doesn't fully trust. But even if he sort of chokes off their access to the president, how much can he manage up and control this president and rein in those impulses? That's really the question that will define whether or not John Kelly is a success as chief of staff.
The same Steve Bannon, by the way, who almost single-handedly reversed several decades worth of U.S. military policy on the Korean Peninsula with one print interview last night. But I digress. We have that ahead of us. We'll fit in a break here. When we come back,